You're listening to a 58 Ember production.
GIRLSCAMP, it's Girls Camp.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Girls Camp podcast. I'm your host, Haley Rawl, and if you are navigating a faith deconstruction too, or simply fascinated by faith deconstruction journeys, by Mormonism specifically, and religion generally, then you are in the right place. Speaking of Mormonism, we are in the midst of what I think is a massive Mormon pop culture moment, and that is the release of the show, The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. There has been much buzz about this show, a lot of controversy. I've talked about it a little bit, but the show has finally come out, and I watched every single second. I have many thoughts and feelings, and I am so glad and honored to be joined today by the queen of our hearts. I think anyone who has watched the show probably has had their hearts stolen by today's guest, Jessie. Jessie sits down. We talk about her Mormon upbringing, what led her to leave the church. She's actually the only one on the show who identifies as ex-Mormon, and we talk about all the Mormonism of the show. But before we dive into the interview, I just wanted to say that watching this show was so fascinating for me. One of the biggest takeaways I had watching as an ex-Mormon was how Mormon I still am, even as an ex-Mormon. And I think it's because the cast members of the show, they're all across the faith spectrum. I do think this is an accurate representation, probably not of the most devout, typical Mormon life, but of a certain type of Mormon life, right? It's these women and how they relate to Mormonism, and they all relate to Mormonism quite differently. And being able to watch them navigate that as a group and individually, my biggest takeaway was realizing how much of my life is still affected by Mormonism. And even though I left the religion over 3-4 years ago now, my life circumstances, because of when I got married, because of when I had kids, because of my family dynamics, because of messaging I received around the patriarchy and sex, there's so much Mormonism still in my life. And I think watching the show kind of showed that to me in a different way. It is very Utah. It is very Mormon, in my opinion. So all the Mormons who were losing their minds over the show might be eating their words. Like I said, maybe not the typical Mormon experience, but definitely a Mormon experience, and actually a whole range of Mormon experiences. I know probably not all of you have watched the show, and Jessie and I actually talk about this as well. I think depending on where you're at in your deconstruction, it might be a little tender and it could be a little triggering. I know I've received messages from some of you who have found it that way, and I think that's totally valid. But for those of you who have watched, also, if you haven't watched, I still think you'll enjoy the interview. We try and give good context to whatever we talk about that relates to the show. And for those of you who have watched, you know that Jessie is just the voice, I would say, in many instances, the ex-Mormon voice that I told her this. I was like, there were so many times where you said the thing that I would have wanted to say in that instance. So I'm rambling on now. Just can't stop thinking about the show. So glad and honored I got to talk to Jessie about it. So without further ado, here's the conversation with Jessie. Welcome, Jessie, to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. I kind of pressured you into this.
No, not at all. I'm so happy. And I mean, the timing is amazing.
Yeah.
I'm sure you are just in the thick of it in all the ways right now.
Yeah, it's nuts right now. Like, I thought I was busy before.
Yes.
I can't even fathom. Like, I'm so busy, but it's so fun. I love it.
How's it been?
So good. I mean, it's been up and down, actually. Like, there was a lot of criticism in the beginning, but I feel like now that the show's coming out, we've had criticism, obviously, but I feel like I've actually gotten more positive than negative, which I was surprised by.
I'm sure with the backlash that it originally received, I'm wondering, and we'll talk about this, I want to get your background quick, but I'm curious like how the tune has changed, because it seems like it has, which I think many people might be eating their words after actually watching the show.
Which
surprise,
I'm glad,
surprise.
because I would respond to people and be like, just wait till you see the show, then judge, without knowing what was on the show, because I didn't see it edited first. And I'm glad that I was right.
I think it is so representative in so many ways of so many different stages of the Mormon experience.
Yeah.
And that's why I think that, so much of the backlash was people saying, this doesn't represent us, this isn't Mormonism. And I mean, I obviously can't speak for everyone, but I feel like so much of, again, various stages of Mormonism were represented.
Which I love. And that's what I think is so interesting is we have 8 girls who are all at different faith levels. And I think that's so true with any religion. There's going to be the devout, the not as devout, the in-between. And I think we showcase that so well. And so that's why I was excited for people to see it.
Yes.
Because someone's going to relate to someone on the cast.
Absolutely. And it showcases the dynamics that regardless of where you are on that spectrum, even if, I'm completely ex-Mormon now, I'm still on that spectrum because I existed within that world. And so me watching, I found it super resonant because I was like, oh, these are still the things that I'm dealing with in my life too. Yeah. And yes, we will get into all of that. Quickly, I would love if you could just give us an in a nutshell background. I don't think the show really delved into really any of your Mormon upbringing, just where you're from, like what your upbringing was like specifically as it relates to Mormonism.
Yeah, which is funny because I do think we all filmed that stuff, but obviously we only got 8 episodes and so much drama happened while we were filming that I think they had to capitalize on that. So hopefully if we get another season, we can kind of dive into each girl's story. But that's why things like this are so great because we can talk about it.
Yeah, totally.
So I always call myself a mutt because I grew up with my mom LDS and my dad was not active. So I got like the best of both worlds. My parents met at BYU, got married in the temple, the whole Mormon thing. But then my dad left when I was probably 5. And I just remember growing up, it was kind of like a non-subject. Like my mom was like, don't ask him about it. She was kind of embarrassed because she had to take us to church alone. And I think she felt ashamed, but she didn't want us to like know why. But I think it's because she was trying to like protect the perfect image, right?
Totally.
So I didn't even know why my dad left till I was probably 18 or 19.
Wow.
Yeah. So he was like open and like cool. Like he would drink, like not like he has like 2 beers max, but like he would do that in front of us. So I knew he wasn't active. He wouldn't go to church with us, but I just didn't know why. Then when I was, a little older, he opened up to me and he went on a mission to Australia. And now mental health is like way more accepted and talked about. But back then, he struggled a lot with anxiety and depression. And he just kind of remembered getting off the plane. He's in Australia as a young kid. They took his passport and they were like, okay, you're here for 2 years. And doesn't matter if you're struggling with depression, anxiety, like you're here. Like
You're
it wasn't
stuck.
an option to go home.
Yeah.
Unless you messed up, right? So he kind of felt like that was his first like, oh, like I'm trapped here, right? And I think that just led to then like him feeling all sorts of ways, but he ended up leaving and he's not like anti by any means, but he's definitely not pro Mormonism.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that him and my mom stayed together because she was devout for a long time. And she still is a member, but I don't think she's been to church in like 7 or 8 years now. So she's definitely like relaxed a little bit.
Kind of slowly relaxed. Yeah. I mean, that's hard to be in a mixed faith marriage for that long, especially, I say this all the time on the podcast, but these dynamics are fairly new. I mean, even still to this day, sometimes people are encouraged to divorce if their partner loses faith.
Yeah.
So for your mom at that time to be continuing to attend while in a mixed faith marriage, that's can be tricky, I can imagine.
Oh, I can't imagine her being able to do that. And I've talked to her since and I know how hard it was, especially because people at church would come up to like me and my sisters and just be like, don't worry, your dad's just lost. He'll find his way. And I remember just being like, my dad's fine. He's a good person. Like
Seems happy.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's funny because I feel like they almost put that in my head that my dad was lost. And as I got older, I was like, wait, no, that's not right. So I'm really glad I grew up that way because it made me so open-minded. I was never like this way or this way, right? But I ended up getting married at 22 to my first husband. And he and his family were super active LDS and kind of like Mormon royalty in their like little neighborhood, like Utah County, like everyone knew who they were.
One of those families.
Exactly.
You grew up in Highland,
Yes.
Alpine, and then where did your ex grow up?
He was in Highland as well. So
Okay.
we actually went to junior high together. I met him in like 7th, 8th grade. And so I had a crush on him in junior high. Like I always knew him. And then on his mission, we had gone on a couple dates before. We wrote on his mission. And then when he got back, we started dating again. So in my head, I was never good enough for like a full active Mormon boy because I was like kind of half in, half out with my family dynamic. But when he showed interest in me, I think it kind of like made me feel like I was worthy of like a Mormon being interested in me. So I kind of clung to that. And his family was really close and they did a lot of things together and they had family dinner every Sunday. And I think there was a part of me that kind of craved that since I grew up halfway with those morals and halfway with not. So I think I really dove into that relationship because I was like, oh, like this is a good active Mormon family. Like it's this stability, right?
Absolutely.
And
yeah.
so I got married at 22, which looking back, like you got married young, right? How old were you?
20. So, yeah, you got 2 years on me.
Yeah. I mean, and it either goes well or ends.
It's luck of the draw, in my opinion.
Yes.
I mean, I really do think it's mostly luck of the draw. My husband and I look at each other all the time because, we got married at 20. I was fresh off my mission. I'd been home for 3 months. Wow. And crazy.
How did you guys meet?
Was I home for 3 months? I was home for 3 months when we got engaged and then 5 months when we got married.
Okay.
He wrote me on my mission out of nowhere.
No.
Literally
Wait,
cold
how did he
call.
find you?
Through a friend. She was
Okay,
like,
that is
you
such
should
a
write
Mormon
Haley.
story.
I know. It was at Cafe Rio that they ran into each other.
So Utah.
The Mormon Mexican chain restaurant.
Exactly.
Yeah, he ran into her. She said, you should write Haley on her mission because he was like, dating is so hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we look at each other all the time and we just say we got lucky that we've changed so much. And not to downplay, I mean, I think there's obviously no matter what, you're going to have to work through things and practice communication and all the things. But we look around at people around us who their paths just went different ways as their brains were literally developing, to Demi's point.
Exactly.
On the show.
No one should be able to get married before 25. Like it should be like you can't rent a car till you're 25. You cannot have a marriage license
Truly.
until you're 25.
Yes. And then we start popping out kids too, which further complicates things. Yeah.
It's so true. So I feel like I was so young and I just, dove in, but I felt like I always say I felt like I was making the safe choice. A good LDS family, a good returned missionary, like how could that go wrong, But we didn't get married in the temple. We messed up before we got married. And I remember like this is like one of my core memories. We met with our bishop in our singles ward. And we had told him we had messed up. We already had our wedding date planned. And I think at this point we were 3 months out. And he was like, there's like no way you can get married in the temple. And for me, I was like, oh, that's fine. Like, doesn't matter, but we can get sealed in a year, right?
Totally.
For him, it was different because he came from that very devout family. I remember coming out of the office and he had anger issues and he punched the tree like outside as hard as he could. And he was like so frustrated. And I should have seen that as a red flag, but I was like, it's fine. He's upset. But I think it was the weight of his family and what they were going to say on him.
The pressure. Yeah.
So we went to my family first and my dad was like, awesome. Now I can come to the wedding. Like, great. And my mom was like, whatever you want. Like they were awesome. We go to his family and I remember them sitting us down in their formal living room, pulling out the scriptures, reading us quotes. And his mom literally looked at me and said, now you're going to have to deal with everyone at the reception asking you how the temple was and you'll have to tell them the truth.
She said that.
Yes. And I was like, I felt so small in that moment. I was just like, okay, but I love your son. We're getting married, which is a good thing. And we're going to work towards the temple, So
I have chills, especially when you're entering this family. You maybe already feel like, you said you were feeling like, oh, I am worthy of this thing. And then they're telling you, actually, you're not. And I hope you suffer for the thing that you did, which is not a big deal.
Which will be okay in 3 months, but not now.
Exactly.
And that's what's so confusing, So I just felt so small and it made me feel not good enough again. And we got married in their backyard. Everything turned out great, but we, for the next year, worked towards being sealed. And so we finally did get sealed. And at our dinner celebrating that, his dad gave a toast and said, we're just so glad this dark cloud isn't hanging over our family anymore. And that again was like, okay, I'm still not good enough.
Yeah.
Like,
even though I did the thing, I got here.
And I felt like they always thought I was this bad example to him, right? Even though like I hadn't done anything bad. We just got sealed and that's how you're going to celebrate it in front of all of our friends and family saying that. I was just humiliated. So that was kind of the pattern throughout our entire marriage with my in-laws, was just always me not feeling good enough. And a few years into it, I think my husband at the time kind of started questioning the church. He had a lot of friends who were smoking weed and drinking and they all gamed together and he started getting into that stuff. He started getting tattoos. And this was all him, but I think they blamed me. Like I was persuading him. And we were in the same place. Like we both were kind of starting to drink together, but I was always against the drug stuff, but he was doing that. But of course I'm the bad influence, right? So, it kind of got to a point though where my husband at the time was getting into those things and it was making him just not who I married. you know? And so I was building my business. So I was kind of going this way, and I thought he couldn't keep a job. He was gaming all day, smoking weed. Like, we were just going in different directions.
Yeah.
And it ultimately did lead to our divorce. And we separated a few times. We just couldn't get on the same page. But it's crazy because I felt I had called his parents multiple times, like telling them like, he's smoking weed, he's doing this, he's doing that. I called them during a fight once when he was like literally chasing me in a church parking lot, screaming at me. And I let them listen. I'm like, this is what your son's doing. And he just had some issues like that. So they knew all the issues, but of course, my experience with a lot of Mormon families is that gets swept under the rug. Image is most important.
Yeah.
So my main experience in the church with Mormon families, and I know not everyone's this way, so I know that, but my experience was that image comes first, especially being in a family like that.
Yeah, well, I think there's maybe even a gendered element to it too.
Yeah.
I don't want to put you in a tricky position with talking about anything you don't want, but it's been interesting to see some of the responses that Zach's family have had.
Yeah.
So if you haven't watched the show yet, there's a woman named Jen, and she's married to this man named Zach, and they have a lot of drama around controlling issues and things like that.
Yeah.
It's been interesting to watch how people have responded to that, because I feel like there's sometimes it's an easy narrative to paint, especially the woman, I feel, as the crazy one or the wayward one. And I feel like there's maybe some gendered aspects to that,
especially
as well.
in the church, because the men hold the priesthood and
Exactly.
they are the head of the home, right? So they get more passes,
Yes.
in my opinion.
And
for
it's
sure.
the woman's job to support the priesthood.
Yes.
So if the woman is not supporting the man, even if the man has problems or is doing problematic things, then usually I feel like that falls more on the woman, and it doesn't quite work the same way in reverse.
100%. And that's why in our show, there is a lot of elements of like, you know, we're breaking the gender norms. And yeah, maybe it was like a little exaggerated or heightened. I think some people are mad about that, but it is a stigma here. So I agree with you. I think that he got passes for that. And of course, his family's always going to protect him. And I don't blame them for that. Like, totally fine. But I think the reason Jen's situation did trigger me so much, and the show only showed like a little bit of my vocalism and opinion on that, is because it felt like my situation all over again. And I've told her many times, like, your in-laws remind me of my ex-in-laws, and your situation is what I lived. And that's why I get so worked up for her, because I know how it feels to be in that.
Totally.
So yeah, and so me and my husband got divorced, and that kind of led to me leaving the church, because just my experience being in that Mormon family honestly drove me away. You know, they're good Mormons, but I've never seen people like gossip more or like treat other people so badly. So I kind of stepped out, and luckily my sisters at that point had left the church. My dad was already out. So for me, it wasn't a huge deal in my family, but in our culture, in our community, it's so hard. And so I got married to my new husband. We met very quickly. He had been divorced. I had been divorced. We connected over that. His family's LDS, but like amazing, so chill. His parents are like the best in-laws I could ever ask for. And I'm always like, okay, I dealt with this, and now I get this as a reward.
Good. You deserve it. You totally
Yeah.
deserve it.
So like our parents are best friends. We all vacation together. We're all going to New York together tomorrow. So I'm so grateful, because I feel like I had to go through that to really appreciate a good dynamic, you know?
Totally.
But yeah, now everything's great, but I have been out of the church for probably 5 or 6 years by now. But I still have like friends, family, employees who are Mormon, and I respect them and I love them. And I think that there are really good elements to the religion and the people, but I think Utah culture specifically has its issues. And I think on the show, I'm the person who kind of showcases that opinion, which
Yes.
they need. I think they need all levels.
Absolutely. I really did see it as kind of this scale of deconstruction. I think that's part of what makes it so fascinating, is you see how people further on the Mormon scale are reacting to certain things versus people more on the not Mormon scale.
Yeah.
And there's all this in between. And I think that's really important to talk about, because that's what's happening.
Well, there's
right?
so much in between, but it's just not public. No one wants that to be exposed here. And that's why I think Mormons were so pissed about the show, is they were like, wait, don't expose that, you know?
Yes.
But especially here in Utah, there's so many Jack Mormons. It's just how it is. And not everyone, but it's a thing.
It exists.
Yeah.
I know a lot of the pushback. I want to talk about the pushback to the show before the show even came out.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of the pushback. Interestingly, I feel like it came from Mormons and probably ex-Mormons equally. And I feel like people were really upset because they felt like, whether they were Mormon themselves or ex-Mormon, well, this doesn't represent Mormonism. And I think ex-Mormons can get precious about that, because ex-Mormons feel like, well, when I was Mormon, I did keep the rules and
Yeah.
I did suffer for it.
So why did I have to do that? and you don't?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
you don't, and you're still getting to maybe benefit from cultural elements or from whatever it may be. And then, of course, you have Mormons who are saying, well, this is my sacred religion and this is not how I live the religion. I'm curious what it was like witnessing and experiencing that backlash, especially where you're at on the scale, where you're less attached to the Mormonism thing.
Yeah.
What was that like?
It was insane. Like going into this, we knew that the name was going to get backlash, right? Like it's a little cringy. We get it. But I did not expect the landslide of hate. And I'm a very confident person. I have a pretty tough skin. And that first day, me and some of the cast were all on a trip together. And we all posted the trailer and we started getting all the comments. And we were just like, what? Like, I was blown away because I really thought people were going to be like, LOL, this is cringy, but I didn't think it was going to be the level it was. And the way I like to say it is, we didn't know the title when we signed up. That usually isn't the case with a new show. Like usually the title comes as the show develops, right? So it's not like any of us went in being like, let's just exploit the Mormon church. And I think people realize or don't realize the cast doesn't have a say in stuff like that.
Totally.
The name, the concept, we're just filming our lives and we had a fun time doing it. So we didn't know. And then second of all, it would be really hard to have a show in Utah County and not bring up religion. It's so embedded in our culture. How would you not? Even Salt Lake Housewives, it touches on it. So I just feel like, yes, the name can trigger people, but I think it also got us to where we're at. The backlash actually made our show more successful, but it was insane to me that there were so many good Mormons. Like any hate comment I got, I would go click on their profile and it was like the most devout
LDS.org. Yeah.
Yes. And
in the bio.
Saying like, you're a skank, you're a hoe, like burn in hell, like the meanest things. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like you're the same one who's going to be knocking on my door asking me to come to church. Like what? So it didn't make sense to me because it was so against what they teach. But I also wasn't that surprised because I know Mormons like that who are very two-faced and judgmental. So, but no, I went through a second where I literally like, I was with the girls and I'm never the one to break. I'm always like, it's fine, whatever. I was like, my business is going to go under because I had comments being like, I'm boycotting your business. And I was like, oh my gosh, like what did I do? But then the next day, you know, we were all talking and we're like, we know what we filmed and 90% of this show is our drama and our lives, not religion. But there's that aspect because we're in Utah County and we all grew up Mormon.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it was shocking, but I think eventually everything on the internet turns, you know? And then I started seeing people being like, okay, you Mormons are being crazy now. Let's support. And now that the show's out, I really haven't seen much about the hate. It's more so just like, oh my gosh, what's going on with Dakota and Taylor and Jen and Zach and Fruity Pebbles, you know?
Yeah. Well,
So-
and I feel like people have come to know you through the show. And that's what's so powerful. I mean, there's much that could be said about reality TV, obviously. And, you know, no one's pretending that it's all completely authentic. But I do think regardless of how much production plays a part, you are seeing how people react to these situations.
Yeah.
And I feel like watching the show, as you come to know each person, then you become invested in them as a person.
Yes.
And of course, that just complicates a very easy narrative of, oh, these are women who just are looking for attention. So they're using Mormonism in order to do that. It's funny because I was thinking about, I mean, now I've watched the show. So now my opinion on it is because I've watched the show. But when the trailer first came out, and I have the benefit of, I mean, I've known Demi for a while, not super closely, but I feel like I'm tangentially kind of in the same circles as some of you all. We had DM'd before.
Yeah.
But I feel like my reaction was actually, I almost just immediately felt so protective of all of you just because of how terrible everybody was being. Yeah. And for me as an ex-Mormon, I think there's various stages too. I think maybe some more tender recent ex-Mormons might feel a little more triggered by people calling themselves Mormon who are not wearing garments or whatever it may be. But for me, I'm kind of like, I don't take it that seriously. So I don't really care that much in that I'm not attached to Mormonism being portrayed a certain way. Yeah. Because to me,
why are we so focused on other people's journeys and not our own? You know,
exactly.
That's the problem with the internet.
Exactly. But it was funny because as I was watching it and then the church coming out with an official statement.
Yeah, that was crazy.
It's just so wild to me because just the fact that people are thinking like this is the problem with Mormonism is so outrageous when you are actually familiar with the actual problems of the religion.
Yeah.
And I saw this woman, I also made a TikTok about this. I don't know if this came across your For You page, but she was saying, I get so many disgusting questions about my religion based purely, so she claims, on the original scandal with the swinging.
Yeah.
And she was saying how upset she was that with the show coming out, she's now going to have to answer increasingly disgusting questions. Girl.
No one cares that much.
No one cares that much. And also, if you're embarrassed about something about your religion, it should not be this.
Yes.
These are like women navigating life, figuring things out.
Yeah.
There's a lot to be worried and concerned about the Mormon religion.
Yes.
And this is just not one of them.
No one on our cast is coming out being like, Mormons are swingers. That's okay. No, the only reason that Taylor's scandal blew up in the Mormon church is because people knew she was Mormon. She never even talked about that hand in hand with the scandal. But it's just people, again, being sensitive. And I think that over the last few years, there actually has been a shift culturally with the church. Like a lot of people are leaving and a lot of influencers and people are talking about it. So I think Mormons are just like so protective right now.
Yes.
And they're like defensive over anything, which I understand. But again, like if you believe, go back to your testimony, because the church does teach that people are going to try to shake that. And there is going to be cultural things that try to sway you, but like just don't listen then, don't watch the show. But I think if you watch the show, you'll realize we're not putting it down by any means.
Well, that was what was so crazy. My experience watching the show, it actually brought up so much for me, which I was surprised by. I mean, yes and no, but even Bentley, because Bentley's my husband, has kind of been watching with me, and we have just been reflecting a lot on our culture, on our upbringing, on how much, regardless of how far you've distanced yourself from Mormonism, and we're obviously still in Utah, so that also plays a part. But I was realizing watching the show how much Mormonism there still is in me.
Well, it was 22 years of your life.
I went on a mission. Even the fact that you all, even you who have left the church, you still have young kids at a young age. You have a divorce under your belt. All of that is informed by, it's not maybe directly, we could argue how much it's directly related. I would say a lot. Some people might say less so. That's not typical.
No.
The place you all are at in your lives is because of Mormonism, regardless of how much you believe it anymore.
Yeah. Well, everyone's childhood affects who they are as an adult. So yes, I grew up this way. It's embedded in me. Even if I leave the religion, it's still there, So I agree with that. And I feel like I've gotten comments like, you're not even Mormon, you shouldn't be on this show. But I was Mormon for 25 years. I've been in doubt. I've done the whole thing. I was a good Mormon for a while. So I have a right to talk on it. Just like Layla's not a wife, but she's been a wife, so she could talk about that.
And you're still friends with a lot of people who believe it.
Yes.
So inevitably, it's going to shape. I mean, that's so much of the show is that your friends are Mormon. And so when you want to go to a Chippendales and have some fun, it's going to be a whole big issue.
Yeah.
It's still affecting your life.
Exactly.
And I feel the same. I mean, my family is still Mormon. I still live in Utah. So no matter how much I could theoretically try and distance myself from it, I'm still interacting with it on an almost daily basis.
Yeah.
So it just kind of is what it is. And I feel like that's one of the things that is so powerful about this show is it shows how deeply embedded Mormonism is, regardless of where you're at on the spectrum of practicing or even believing. I think it also does a good job of showing the difference between orthodoxy, people who really believe, and orthopraxy, people who really practice. There's people on the show. This came up with Demi. She said, I consider myself a 9 out of 10 on the Mormon scale. Is she practicing Mormonism the way a lot of people would? Not necessarily, but she could believe Mormonism more than the person who's wearing their garments.
Which religion and God is such a personal thing that I think it should be about how you feel and about your relationship with that religion. So yeah, it's like hard because I think here in Utah it is judgy, right? Like if you don't do this, if you don't do that. But I actually think that people like that are more spiritual. Like Demi is the most spiritual, the most in tune with energies. Like she's so connected to that. Whereas other people I think are just going through the motions. And I don't think going to church every Sunday makes you a good person. And that's something on the show that I struggled with when we would talk about religion. I'm like, Mormonism isn't exclusive with being a good person. So like when we got uninvited to the blessing, Jen was saying a lot of things like, I don't want bad feelings there. And I'm like, we're bad just because we're not Mormon? Like, insane, you know? So that has always been my experience. And so those things on the show triggered that not good enough feeling I had in my first marriage and growing up in the religion.
Absolutely. I want to talk about the baby blessing.
Yeah.
So just to give a very quick overview, you got invited. So Jen, I would say, is probably self-proclaimedly the most Mormon.
The most active, yeah.
And she's married to someone who is also very much so.
Yeah.
They hosted a graduation party. Her husband graduated from BYU. And you were all in attendance. There was sort of an after party hot tubbing with just the cast.
Yeah.
So there wasn't like family members there of the person who had graduated. And your husband Jordan brought a flask and you two were drinking in the hot tub.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if one could argue it wasn't directly correlated, but then you, as well as a few of the other girls who were less on the Mormon scale, got not only not invited, but uninvited from a baby blessing, which for those who don't know, in Mormon culture, after you have a newborn baby, within the first few months, you give them a blessing. It's just like a cultural thing, a priesthood blessing. You can see it on the show, how that pans out. What was that like for you, getting uninvited?
So two things. One thing that the show didn't show was that after that hot tub scene, we all went to a nightclub, and that was Jen's doing. Like, she scheduled it. So we went to a club where there was alcohol and drinking because she wanted to dance. She loves dancing. Love Jen. She's like a ray of sunshine. But in Jordan's head, he's like, I'm just pre-gaming like you would, because drinks at a club are $15 each. I'm going to get lit a little bit. And when we're at the club, no one has an issue with it, you know? So again, I know it's a little inappropriate to bring a flask to someone else's house, but it's not like we were like inside showing as parents, you know? So I think that in our heads, that's just normal. But again, going back to Mormon religion, we know it's not. So I did apologize to Jen, but that's something I think that was left out. And then number two was, if I wasn't invited just because I'm not Mormon or whatever, I honestly wouldn't care, because I get it. Like, I wouldn't invite Jen to an activity that was maybe against really, not that I do stuff like that, but like, I get not being invited because I'm not part of the church. It was the uninviting, because I think it showed in the car, she invited us. And then in our group message, she had sent an invite to everyone in our group message for the cast.
Date and
told
time.
Us date, time. I had it in my calendar. So that stuff you saw where we called her, that was 100% accurate. Like, that's how we found out. And it was hard because me and Jen at that point were probably the closest. That was before I got like super close with Demi. We were getting closer, but Jen was like my girl up until then. So for me, I was like, oh, like, I thought we were closer than this and we were good friends. And so for you to do this to me just sucks, because you did invite me. So, and then Demi being a Mormon, like, yeah, she's not practicing the way Jen does, but like, she is Mormon. And I just think it was more so the talk of like, we don't want bad feelings there. We don't want, it was more so just like, what do you think we're going to do? Pull out a flask in the church? Like, come on, you know? So
Totally.
it was disappointing. And then I know it also kind of came from Zach, because when he jumped on, I knew like this is really him, and she had to go along with it. So that was disappointing, and I think led to like, that was like the first sign in their relationship where I was like, maybe he runs the show. And then obviously we saw that is the dynamic.
That is the dynamic. When we learned more and more about Zach, I literally said to Kylie, so my friend Kylie Kadich and I have been watching together, I was like, oh, thank God, now we have a male villain. Like, I don't want to villainize women, but I was like, okay, I'll villainize this man.
Yeah.
Like, I am very comfortable villainizing this guy.
It was funny because in the trailer, there was a scene where I think Macy says like, now the drama's with the husbands. And so many people were like, oh my gosh, the husbands are fighting. Ew. No one realized what that meant. And now you guys do. And it's wild.
And it's so typical, which I want to talk more about, because I want to talk about Chippendales.
Yeah.
The baby blessing thing, I think that was so resonant for so many people. And I really, again, just seeing a reality TV drama play out, but based on something like a Mormon baby shower was so fascinating, because yes,
it's so niche.
It's so niche, but it's so real for the people who understand that niche. And I was thinking about even just hearing you recap it. Yes, it's kind of like a drama, like, oh, you got left out and you got uninvited. But there's also these really, really deep things that harkens back to, which is that you were told you weren't worthy to get married in the temple, that your in-laws said you weren't Mormon enough. That brings up a lot for anyone who has been Mormon. It's more than just someone uninviting you. It's feeling, again, unworthy. like you said, like you're bad or an evil influence, that you can't simply go support someone in this like really lovely moment
Especially
in their
as
life.
a mom. Like I'm a mom. I love my kids so much. Of course I want to come celebrate my friend and her child, regardless of whether I believe or not. And I think that something I've actually realized in therapy is my core belief is that I'm not good enough. And I think it does tie obviously to the church and like the things I experienced. So even though I've like moved past all that, having that situation happen kind of opened up that feeling again. And I didn't realize it would trigger me as much as it did. But when I was on that phone call with them, Demi, I think, handled it so well. And I was getting heated. I was like trying to keep my mouth shut because I was like, this is bullshit. Exactly what I would expect. And in my opinion, I didn't think it made Jen and Zach represent the church well. I thought it made them look more judgmental because wouldn't you want to invite your friends to something where they may feel the spirit?
Absolutely.
You know, like that's a chance to convert again.
Exactly. I think it was interesting too. And obviously I'm biased on this side of things.
Yeah.
But it was interesting to watch different characters on different scales of Mormon orthodoxy and see how sometimes the most Mormons, the most self-proclaimed believers, were sometimes the ones acting the least. I mean, I don't want to call it
in a sense.
Exactly.
Yes.
And I mean, even that term, maybe that's too harsh, but just showing that oftentimes, as I see it now personally on this side of things, something like adhering really strictly to a religion is oftentimes the biggest obstacle. I wanted to say stumbling block from my Mormon upbringing.
Yeah.
It's the biggest obstacle to actually what the core of the religion proclaims to be, which is love and care and service. And you saw that in multiple interactions. I mean, I think the biggest one for me was seeing that between Taylor and her mom, and seeing that at times it seemed difficult for her mom to show care and compassion because she was so concerned with
The religion.
exactly. And the rules of when you're supposed to get pregnant, when you're supposed to move in together, and when you're supposed to get married. That seemed so on display for me. And again, that's not representative of every single Mormon. I'm not even claiming it is. It is representative of some Mormons and of some experiences that many of us have gone through.
Yeah. And it's sad because I think a lot of Mormons, like Taylor's mom, are coming from a place where they just want to protect their children. They don't want them to go through these things. They want them to have a happy, good life. But it does come across that way. And that can be really hard.
It's really
And
hard.
Some come across better than others. I have so many Mormons in my life who are so amazing. Like all my salon girls, like most of them are Mormon and have been so supportive. And those are the types of Mormons that I'm like, okay, I could get on board. And something that's interesting to me is you always hear, especially here, it's like, what is it? Like, it's not the religion, it's the people. Like the church is perfect, the people aren't.
Yeah.
And the way I like to reference that is, okay, but what if you worked in a toxic work environment? Would you just stay even though the people were toxic? No, you would leave and get a new job, right? So the people do make up your experience. So I don't think that's like a good reason to just stay because that can be more damaging, right? And I think that's why a lot of people do leave. And I think that Utah especially is a different beast. Like I've gotten a lot of comments like that wasn't my experience in the Mormon religion living in California or whatever. Utah's its own thing. I will say that.
It is its own thing. I feel like the only other name that could have possibly worked for the show is Secret Lives of Utah Wives.
Yeah.
Still, I think Mormon was very appropriate, but I do think
got attention.
Yeah, it got attention and it worked.
Yeah.
I think Utah and Mormonism are so deeply intertwined. It's difficult to even dissect the two.
Even if we named our show that, we still would have touched on the church because again, it's inevitable, and then people still would have been offended. You can't win either way.
You can't win either way.
And honestly, and I don't even know if this is actually the case, but I like to say this to people that if you think of like, have you seen Vanderpump Rules?
No.
Okay.
And I should.
You need to. It's
I
iconic.
really should.
11 seasons, you can do it.
I actually saw someone, literally, Jesse, I cannot tell you how deep in this Secret Lives of Mormon Wives hole I've been, but I saw someone, the reason I wanted to start Vanderpump Rules is someone was saying about your show, I was reading comments on a TikTok and they were like, this show is giving early Vanderpump Rules energy.
No.
Yes.
Okay, that's the biggest compliment.
Yeah, I feel like in reality TV land, I'm like, oh, that's such a compliment.
It is, because back in the early days, they were unhinged and it was amazing. But the way I like to reference it is Vanderpump Rules started in a restaurant and it was about the cast of the restaurant, or sorry, like the servers. And that was the cast and they would be at work and show their dynamics. And as the show went on, it evolved to where none of them worked at the restaurant and it was about their lives. I feel like if our show continues, that's probably going to be how it is, where it's really heavy in religion and there's always going to be that element, but then you're going to fall in love with us as people and get to know us, and it's going to evolve more into our lives, because right now we just have to introduce that religious aspect, and it'll always be there, but it won't be the focus, I think, if we had 3, 4, 5 seasons, right? And that's how every show is. You have to find your footing.
Yes.
So.
And I feel like I've actually been thinking about, I was talking to Kylie about this too, but we were talking about Kylie. Okay, so for anyone listening who doesn't know, Kylie Kadich, she's one of my dear friends. She grew up in Utah, but she's never been Mormon.
Yeah, her episode was so good. I listened to that.
I love her with all my heart. She also, I think this is important to the context, she went to a Catholic school.
Okay, yeah.
And we were talking about just internet hate generally, and the Reddit snark pages and the comment sections.
Yeah.
And the only observation that I've made is that is so much worse for Utah-based influencers, creators, and for Mormon adjacent.
Yeah.
And as Kylie and I were talking about this, because Kylie's also the most literal, unproblematic soul on the planet.
Yeah.
So she really does not get very much hate at all. And she has a huge platform. And I feel like part of it is because she's so removed from the Utah Mormonism, because I was telling Kylie, if you grew up in Utah, you are probably one connection away from almost anyone.
No, we in the kitchen when I met your husband, we had
dated
like 4
the same
connections.
guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. That's not rare.
No.
And I feel like it gives people this sense of almost ownership and entitlement. And I think we saw that in the original backlash to the show, because these people who don't really know you maybe feel like they know you more than they do.
For sure.
Because they're not that many connections away, because the Mormon Utah world and just the Mormon world generally is very, very small.
Yeah, it's like my friend's sister's cousin dated her, so I know her.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or my so-and-so was her stake president back in when she was 14. The connections are really strong. And so I feel like it's interesting to watch that happen. And another thing I was thinking about, I actually interviewed Indy Blue, who she became a pretty big internet figure when she was quite young in high school. And she said it really shifted her paradigm, because she realized she was getting a lot of hate, but the hate was really mostly coming from Utah Mormons. Yeah. And then the rest of the world was cheering her on.
Yes.
And I've been curious if you've experienced this, because I've been thinking anyone outside of that bubble probably has such a different perspective and perception of the entire show.
1000%. I just for my experience, like on my own, I have had people text, like, so I own a hair salon, and I have had clients text stylists and be like, because you're associated with Jay-Z and Jesse, I can't support you anymore. I can't come to you. And that breaks my heart, because I am inclusive. Like, come to my salon, no matter who you are, we'll make you feel beautiful. I don't care about your religious background or like what you do in your personal time. But for my stylist to lose business over me, I felt so guilty. So I've had a lot of community hate. But then in the bigger picture, I feel like everyone outside of this bubble has been like, oh my gosh, like I would love to drink with you and have a good time. You're my favorite one. You're so fun, because they didn't grow up in this little bubble. So yeah, that's been my experience for sure. And I don't know about the other girls, but I do feel like I knew that going in, because what is Mormonism? Like 0.017% of the world, and our show's worldwide. So I knew we would get this small percentage of Mormon hate, but the rest of us would be just intrigued and interested. So,
and fascinated by what it is and what it looks like.
Exactly.
And I think it's a really good thing, in my opinion, to show the world, again, these various journeys through the religion. I don't even think that's a bad thing for Mormonism either.
Yeah.
That's what's funny watching the show is, I mean, certainly certain Mormons were painted in maybe not so great a light, but I mean, I don't know. It was just interesting to witness it actually unfold.
Yeah.
And the fact that people would say, well, I'm not going to go to your salon anymore is so silly, because in some ways you're also showing at least some level of support for Mormonism by going on a show with that title.
Exactly. And most of the girls, 6 out of 8 are active Mormons, and I hang out with them all the time, love and support them. Half of my stylists are Mormon, my friends, my family. I'm not anti by any means. Like, it's not for me. And I have strong opinions about certain things, but I'm not going to like shun you because you're not, you know? And some people have told me, you have no right to speak on this because you're not Mormon. But that was my experience. And if it wasn't yours, that's amazing. And I'm so happy for you. But everyone has a right to speak on their own journey and experience in a faith, right?
Absolutely.
No matter what faith it is.
And it's really important to hear all sides and perspectives. You're not going to get a full picture if only the most devout of Mormons are allowed to talk about or showcase what their experience is like. You're just not going to get the full picture because that's not the full picture. To your point, the reality is people are all across that scale. So that is a reality for many people.
Exactly.
Yes. I want to talk about the Chippendales situation.
Chippendales of it all.
Oh my gosh. So the background on that one, again, long story short, the cast goes to Vegas. You planned a surprise for Layla's birthday.
Yes.
So obsessed with Layla also.
She's the best.
She's the best. She's
I feel
so
like
sweet.
she's really going to come out of her shell too, season 2, when then she can like, she was so fresh out of her divorce at that point, and now she's like single, ready to mingle. Well, actually she has a boyfriend, but she's still kind of single and fun, you know?
Yes,
like she's not
totally.
married.
And so young.
Yes.
I was really impressed by her too, because like, you're 22. I can't, where I was at 22.
No, right?
I would
think
not
it's 'cause
want
she has 2 kids.
on TV. Yes.
Level-headed. Yeah,
Yes.
she's great.
So you planned a Chippendales surprise. The girls all come and you go and meet the dancers backstage and are like oiling them up. It's like funny and silly. And Jen the whole time is obviously very uncomfortable, seemingly because, I mean, based on the things that were shown in the show, at least, because of less so, I guess I'm pointing out, of like, oh, I don't feel comfortable with this. And it seemed like she was worried about what this would look like and what the perception would be, particularly to her husband.
Yeah.
So then after you go backstage, you all are in a waiting room before the show, and Jen, Taylor, and Michaela end up not attending the show because their husbands or boyfriends are uncomfortable with them attending. I literally wrote this down from Demi. There was so many points, you and Demi, I was literally just like snapping my fingers. But when Demi said this, I was like, okay, I have to pause that and write it down. She said, here we have a perfect example of the misogyny that goes on within the Mormon church. And I don't know if that's going to be solved by them not going to Chippendales.
Yes. Mic drop.
I was like, oh, is that not the truth? Like, this is such a little microcosm of such a massive, what I see as an issue. And I think you do as well, based on your response to all of that. And then the Jen and Zach situation, Zach ended up saying absolutely terrible things about her being disgusting and not loving her anymore and wanting to take the kids and divorce her based on her
walking in.
Didn't
even stay.
being in the room with the dancers. While meanwhile, you and Demi are like oiling them up, which I want to go to Chippendales, by the way. I've never gone. It looks so fun.
We need to go. We'll do a girls trip. We'll take Kylie.
Please.
No, well, the funny thing is, I have been to Chippendales with my mom. Like, it's a performance. Yes, there's nudity, but like, there's grandmas in the audience. Like, it's just like a fun night with your girls, and you're not doing anything inappropriate. You're not going to have sex with them on stage.
It's silly.
It's silly and fun. Half them are gay, and half of them are like in relationships. Literally, there was one guy I was oiling down who was telling me about his fiance and how she's a nurse and was like praising her, like, so sweet.
Cute.
Like, this is their job. Like, they're actors and dancers, right? And my husband is so awesome and supportive of everything I do. I knew he wouldn't have an issue, but like, I told him when I planned it, and he was like, awesome, go have fun. So most of our husbands were great. The girls that were uncomfortable, like, I think was telling of their relationships, and not saying that like you should be able to go to a strip club whenever you want, but you should be able to like have trust in your relationship that you can hang around, have a good time, and not do anything inappropriate. And I think the double standard for me was that, you know, she's doing this and he's just berating her while he's gambling and losing all their money, which is against the church as well. And then talking down to her emotionally abusively, and that's also against like the church's standards. So if he hadn't done those things, maybe he'd have a leg to stand on, but he was making mistakes at the same time. So that was hard for me.
The hypocrisy really, really drove it home.
Yes.
Because hypocrisy on so many levels. He's allowed to have his vice that he
with
chose.
Her money.
With her money that she's supporting, that he's open about. I was shocked even that he was open about
when they
that.
were packing for Vegas, you could like see how giddy he was.
He was so excited to go gamble her $2,500.
Like an allowance, like a kid. It was so weird to me.
It was so weird.
Yeah.
And then all of that, and then she comes to a surprise, is standing backstage with these
and
dancers.
she wasn't even like, she was like very removed.
No, she was looking down at the ground.
Which he should be proud of her for handling it that way if that's what he wanted. So I thought she was respectful of him.
Absolutely.
And then called him and let him know, and he just like laid into her. So yeah, it was hard for me to watch. It really was.
It was so hard to watch. I think that was one of those moments where, and I've never been in a relationship like that, but I know how real that is.
Yeah.
I know how real those dynamics are. And I know how fueled they are by Mormon doctrine.
Yeah.
And how there is people in the church who get messaging that makes them feel like they are valid or justified in treating their own wife that way.
Yes, just because they're the priesthood holder.
Absolutely.
You know?
And I do think it's, maybe I do think it's a misinterpretation of the core elements of the gospel, which again are love and what have you. But I also think that there's enough patriarchal messaging that can really embolden men to feel like they can speak down to their wives, that they can control their wives, that they don't trust their wives. And especially when, I mean, it's hard to even call Chippendale sex, but there's some element of sex involved in that because it's like erotic or whatever. There's also a lot of hypocrisy there because the sex stuff is just so much worse than gambling, which to me, gambling is way more destructive.
Oh my gosh. Like, he lost a lot of their real money. He had a real addiction. That broke their family more than this ever could. So
absolutely.
The double standard was insane. And I think the biggest problem that I experienced with their dynamic on the show was A, it triggered me because I've been in something like that. And B, Jen is just kind of like this light and this sunshine. Like, she's truly such a great person and is so fun. And I think he dampens that a little. And we've all told her that. But it was almost like she was one Jen with us. And then if cameras were on, or if she knew Zach would watch this, or if he's around, she's a more like in her shell type of Jen. And it's like so stark, the difference. And it made me sad because I'm like, the Jen I know without Zach would be like, woo! Like, she loves to go to clubs. Anytime we travel, she's like, let's go to nightclubs. Like, she's just that fun girl. Not that she's doing anything wrong. She just loves to have fun. So I'm like, without him, I think she would have been okay with it. And I'm not speaking for her. That's just my experience.
Interpretation.
So it made me sad that like she couldn't just let loose and have a fun night with her girlfriends, And the rest of us, like Jacob's, awesome with Macy going, and Brett's great with Demi going. Demi had her hands on a guy's ass and she sent him the video right after, and he's like, you go girl. Like, he's a supportive king. So it's just like, that's what a real relationship should have, is just like trust and like boundaries of like, hey, if you're going to do this, I know you're not going to take it too far. So have fun,
Absolutely. I was thinking of what a good litmus test, honestly, Chippendales is. I'm like, anyone should just casually be like, I want to go to a Chippendale show.
When you're dating someone,
yes,
like, put them through
there
that.
you go. That's add that to the list of questions you're supposed to ask your future partner.
Also, this may be like sexist, but I do think there's a difference between women going to something like that and men going to a strip club, because like men are hornier by nature. Like, they're wired differently. Us girls aren't like, oh my gosh, I'm so turned on.
You don't go to Chippendales to get aroused.
No, it's literally the fun with your girlfriends, right? Like, we know half of them are gay and they told us they were. Like, it's more just like entertainment. Like, they were really good dancers.
Yes,
like,
and it's funny.
It is funny. It's
funny and fun.
And they lean into that,
yes. Yes, Kylie and I were actually talking about that because we paused it and we were like, okay, is this a double standard?
Yeah.
Because if my husband was oiling up a sexy woman's boobs, I would feel different, because it is different.
It is. And I hate to say that, but that's where like gender roles are kind of like true.
And I think there's an element of, there's power dynamics as old as time. I think with women, there's biological differences. I think there's a lot of differences that make that a different situation. I also think the show of it all, like, I kind of see it as if Bentley went to Moulin Rouge, which he would never do with a group of guys.
Yeah. Could you imagine boys' night? I would actually love to see that.
I would be like, wait, what? But that to me is a more equivalent. And then like go meet the dancers or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just, it is just not a big deal. And obviously because I don't subscribe to any of that anymore, I see it differently. But to your point, I know Mormons who go see Chippendale shows and it's just not a big deal.
Oh, Macy's mom is like Relief Society president. And she's like, I've been to this
She
with my
mentioned
mom.
that. Yes. She mentioned that. I think it also shows another huge theme of the show is the perception. How much of it is about perception?
Because if we hadn't been filming this, would half of you reacted that way?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And all the way back to the flask in the hot tub. The only not the only empathy, but I could sympathize with Jen
Yeah.
just because she was worried about how she was going to be perceived by her in-laws
Yes.
based on who she's friends with. And I was just at so many different levels, you see this fear of perception
Yes.
over anything else.
Yep.
And that's why I think it's really brave for someone like Demi, who does consider herself Mormon to some degree. I don't know to what degree.
Yeah.
I mean, 9 out of 10, I guess. But I think it was brave of her to be perceived talking about sex, to be perceived wearing clothing without garments, and not be afraid of the weight of that perception or letting that weight of perception change how she behaved.
Because she's confident in who she is, her testimony, her religion on her own. And Demi and I actually both went into the show being like, we're just going to be 100% authentic. Like, we're going to show our true selves, knowing we could get hate. And we've gotten a little hate, but like mostly people I think have realized that like Demi's genuinely who she is. Even the fighting scenes, like that is Demi. In Take It or Leave It, like she was true to herself. And I think people can see that. I think when you're watching reality TV, you can see who's being calculated, who's trying to play the game, and you can see who's just like there to be themselves.
Yep. I was thinking watching the show, I was like, there's two things I think that really help on reality TV. One, being authentic, and two, and maybe the biggest one, just being willing to own up to your mistakes.
100%, which Taylor does a fabulous job at.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I was thinking that with Demi too. Demi said she called Taylor white trash. That's a really nasty thing to say.
Yeah.
But not only did she apologize to Taylor and say, I'm so sorry. I have a tendency to sometimes say stuff like that. She showed self-awareness. She apologized. And then Taylor said, I think I'd rather not sleep in the same room with you tonight. And she said, of course, like take your time. That to me,
emotional maturity.
yes, it's emotional maturity. And it shows that the biggest thing, we're all going to do shitty stuff. We're all going to say shitty stuff. It is what it is. But being willing to practice self-awareness, take ownership, and apologize is the difference for people who, you know, are not able to do that. It's
Whitney.
Yeah, seriously.
But we're seeing her lean in right now to like, I'm not in the wrong. Whereas, yeah, you're right. Like someone like Demi or Taylor, like they've owned their actions. And I think that makes them more human.
Yes.
Because we all make mistakes.
Yes. And I think with the Mormon thing, I've obviously been reflecting a lot on this. I think Taylor is such an interesting character to show Mormonism because she's done so many things that like a good Mormon wouldn't do. But I feel like even within the season, you see so much growth from her and so much self-reflection.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is such a powerful thing to witness, especially as someone who has suffered under the same messaging that she received. And obviously I'm over here like, just leave the church, babe. Like,
I know, right?
So much of that shame feels really difficult for me personally to manage while still receiving that messaging actively.
Yeah.
But you're seeing this self-awareness and this growth. And
episode 1 Taylor versus the rest of the season is a different person.
Huge. A completely different person. And I think speaking about deconstruction, and I use that word a lot, like deconstructing Mormonism is different than just leaving Mormonism. And I actually feel like I was watching some of the cast members deconstruct Mormonism while still in the religion because they're deconstructing patriarchy. They're deconstructing messages about what it means to be a wife. You see active conversation. They're deconstructing sex and taboos around sex. You're watching deconstruction happen. And I think a lot of people, and I mean, I get this as well, you know, people will call you naive or immature. I'm grouping myself in this. And I'm like, yeah, I probably am naive and immature in some ways because I didn't get to have all of these experiences that normal people or people outside of a high demand religion get to have.
Especially at a young age, early 20s.
Yes. And I feel like people will judge you based on their standard, but it's like within this bubble that we grew up in, you know, there's a lot to deconstruct, and seeing women do that in various ways, I think is really powerful to watch.
I actually think that once, like, it's going to be interesting to see where the Mormon church is 20, 30 years from now when the older generation isn't running it and it's our generation. And these women who are deconstructing these like values and morals that have been around forever, but maybe don't serve us. And maybe they stay in the church and they're the ones running it, or the men too. But I think it's going to be interesting because I think our generation has a very different view. We're more progressive.
Yeah.
So I am actually excited to see if that can change. And I think our show is starting a lot of those conversations.
It is. And it's, I mean, yeah, I'm curious. Do you ever wonder if like the brethren, like the apostles of the church, like, do they get a report? Like, they probably got a report of like, this is what happens in the show.
People were tagging like Russell M. Nelson in our things, like the prophet. I'm like, okay,
Not
I'm
100-year-old Russell M. Nelson.
No,
like,
literally.
watching the Fruity
But
Pebbles
here's the
drama.
thing. Could you imagine? Demi would die. But even if they're not watching it, maybe their grandkids are, like they're
Absolutely.
hearing about it somehow. And like, obviously they released a statement about our show and a movie that's coming out.
Yeah, they know.
They know it's happening. And this is my take. Have you seen Book of Mormon?
Yes, the musical.
They take out ads in the Book of Mormon playbill. So for me, I'm like, you should do that with our show. It's marketing. And if you can lean into Book of Mormon, which is literally making fun of your religion, that's not what we're doing. 6 out of the 8 girls are active. Take out ads on Hulu.
Yeah.
That's what I think they should do.
It is interesting to watch the difference between the reaction to something like Book of Mormon, the musical, versus this show.
Yeah.
And I think, again, it highlights the harshness. They're so much more harsh towards people who are claiming Mormonism in any way, which feels really bizarre.
Yeah.
You would think, wait, wouldn't you be more harsh towards people who are so obviously against the church and, quote, anti-Mormon? Why are you being so harsh towards women who are saying, no, we are Mormon in a sense, or,
we're just trying our best.
Yes. And like Jen's Mormon.
Yes.
She is.
She loves it.
Yes.
And I think it was smart of Hulu to do a cast that had all different degrees of the religion, because if they had had 8 devout women, it would have felt like a conversion show. It would have felt culty, right? Like, we need those different levels. And I think everyone brings something to the table. And I think that's what people enjoy, because even like outside of Mormonism, like we went on Vial Files last week, and Nick was telling us how he grew up super Catholic. And he's like, even though it wasn't Mormonism, I relate so much to the guilt, the burden, the pressure to be a certain way. So even if you're not Mormon, most people have grown up in either a culture or a religion that's very demanding. So many people can relate to us,
Yes, it's more resonant than you think. I've even experienced that with this podcast. Even people who, people are either friends with someone who grew up very fundamentally religious, or they had purity culture messaging, whatever it may be. And so Mormonism is kind of like the epitome of all of that.
Yeah.
And that's why it's a really good thing to talk about in order to dissect a lot of that, because I feel like Mormons experience that like to level 1,000.
Yes.
And a lot of people experience that to varying degrees.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk too about, there's a conversation, I think this happens at multiple points in the show, about the women, the wives, being the breadwinners for a majority of the couples. And I'm curious your thoughts on that. You own a business, and how that shifts the narrative, and I guess just your thoughts on that whole messaging of like women being the providers in a religion where that's not the case usually. Yeah.
I would say that it was funny to watch the dynamic of all of us talk about that and how each husband reacted. Like Macy, for example, is the breadwinner, and Jacob is like so supportive. He has a job now, but like he did go through a time where he wasn't working because he got laid off. And he was just like supportive king, watched their kids, because in his head, which I think this is the correct way to think, we're a partnership. We both chose to have children. You have to work to survive. So like, you're going to pick up the slack here, I'll pick up the slack here. And that was such a healthy dynamic. My husband's the same way. He does solar, he travels for work, but there was a time when that was really hard for him to be gone while I'm running 4 or 5 businesses, filming a show, having 2 kids. So he stopped working and helped me out. And he was totally fine to do that because I'm bringing home the bacon, right?
Yep.
And I think a normal, healthy dynamic should be that way. My biggest pet peeve is when kids are like, they're like, oh, the dad's babysitting the kids. It's like, no, he's watching his own children,
his literal own kids. Yeah.
Exactly. So so it was interesting to see those husbands, and then the husbands like Zach, who were like so struggling with the fact that their wives are making money. Like that was so hard for him to accept. And I was like, what? Like, I don't get that. Like your wife is supporting you while you're building your career and dream, and that's hard for you. Like, but it is true that in the church, like you do just kind of grow up with like the doctrine of like, the man's the priesthood holder, the head of the home, he provides, and the wife has the kids and does that. And yes, 50, 60 years ago, that may have worked, but we're also in an economy now where sometimes you need 2 incomes. And that's just reality. Things are very different.
And things happen, like you got divorced.
Yes.
What if you were, what if that was 10 years from now and you hadn't worked?
Yeah.
And then you got divorced?
I think about that all the time.
Yeah.
The fact, I'm so grateful that I built my business during my first relationship, because I've seen women who have gotten divorced and have no choice but to either stay or completely start over? Or
Because
what if your spouse dies?
They have no financial independence at all. It's really scary.
It's so scary.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that it's a good discussion to have in the religion because not every Mormon is this way. Like there's obviously people who are like, that's not how my relationship is, and that's great, but it is kind of a stigma.
It is. And for anyone listening, it literally says, still to this day, I check up on this every once in a while.
I know what I'm talking
because
about.
I'm like, is this still a thing? It says in the family proclamation to the world, which is revelation from God given to a Mormon prophet.
Yeah.
It says that the men should provide and the women should be home with the kids unless in extenuating circumstances.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty regressive ideology to still be canonized in Mormon theology. That's a big deal.
They need to shift that a little.
They really should because, and I think to your point, I'm all for whatever works for anybody. Again, I think the financial dependence is a really important consideration. However, I do think it's interesting too. I've thought about this a lot with women making money via social media, via brand deals on TikTok and things like that, and how easily discounted I think that can be as well, how it can be treated. I mean, you see this in Zach in one of the last episodes. He's kind of like, yeah, babe, but like, this isn't real.
This isn't real. This is your side gig. Yeah.
She's on a #1 hit reality TV show on Hulu. That's a huge fucking deal, Zach.
Yeah.
Like, and he didn't know that at the time.
Yeah.
But just also the fact that, you know, I feel like maybe if Jen wanted to like go be a lawyer or something, that might be different. But it's just interesting to think about how something like Mom Talk or TikTok can be so
seen as silly. Exactly.
And fleeting. And perhaps there's some truth to that. Obviously, like social media is always changing, but it's like these women, all of you women have made phenomenal money.
Yeah.
That takes strategy.
It does.
That takes talent.
It does. And I will be honest, going into this show, I was friends with some of them, but not all of them. And I was nervous because I felt like I was the only one who actually had a real job, is how I saw it. Like, I own these businesses. I don't make my money on TikTok or Instagram, and they do. So I was kind of nervous because I kind of thought it was that way too. Like, I was being kind of judgmental. And I've seen through being friends with these girls that there is a lot of strategy. There's time. You have to have the it factor for it to even go well, you know? And it takes a lot of like hustle and a lot of hard work to build up that audience. And now, like, look at girls like Macy who have taken that audience and turned it into a real business. So you can do that, you know? And I think Zach kind of talking down to her like, oh, this is just what we're doing for now. Like, it just is so condescending, especially because Jen finds joy and pleasure in this and it fulfills her. And I think moms, we need something outside of just the home to feel like a normal human being, because we lose ourselves in motherhood and then your kids grow up and move out and you don't know who you are.
Yeah, it's an identity loss thing. And I think having female friendships, having projects or, you know, jobs, even part-time jobs can be a huge part of, maintaining that.
Yeah.
I'm curious. I wanted to ask you what your intention was going on the show.
Yeah.
So I'm curious what your intention was going on the show. And now that the show has been released, you've got a pretty good idea how people are thinking about it and reacting to it. How has that intention played out, and how do you feel about the choice to ultimately go on the show?
That's a great question. I'm going to be honest. I listened to your podcast. I binged it before we filmed. And I think I messaged you and I was like, I'm filming a show soon. I just wanted to let you know. Your podcast helped me.
Some people, because I had talked about getting, Bentley and I have been in like talks. I don't even know. It's actually a Hulu show too.
Oh, no way. Okay.
Different premise, but the Mormonism kind of plays in. So I had talked about that on the podcast, and you're like, I'm doing a Hulu
you and
show
Ty
too.
were doing an episode where you were like, we heard there's a Hulu show, and I was like, that's me.
Yes.
Yeah, but no, your podcast helped me a lot because I knew going into the show that I was going to be the non-Mormon, the ex-Mormon, right? Because of my life. And so I really wanted perspective on that. And I feel like your podcast helped me so much, not only with your point of view, but all your guests' point of views, and just, you know, kind of validating my experience, because I didn't want to go on and be like the Heather Gay, you know, like the anti-bad Mormon. I wanted to have a well-rounded conversation, which your podcast does an amazing job at. So I binged it, and it gave me so much confidence going into the season and being like, no, I'm not the only one who's felt this way. I know there's a big community that has felt this way. So my intention, again, I didn't know the name of the show, but I knew that it was going to talk about religion because of our community. So I went in wanting to just show my life, show that you can be a businesswoman. I didn't talk about it on the show a ton. We filmed, but it didn't get in there. But I talked a lot about my religious experience, how and why I left the church, and then also how I built my business. And my biggest story that I wanted to share was that I didn't graduate high school and now I have a multi-million-dollar business. So I just wanted to empower women that like, you can do whatever you want, whether that is being a mom or a working mom or starting a business, whatever. So I just wanted to show that. And then along the way, I met these amazing women, and we're all, minus Whitney, really, really close, like talk every single day. And I think also showcasing that you guys saw us fight a lot in the show, but I think we worked through it, and that's real life. That's relationships. So showcasing that you can have like a strong group of female friends who support each other through the good and the bad, and also be a working mom and have your outlets. Like I just wanted to show my life. And I think I did a good job at that. And hopefully next season it can dive more into like my religious background and my working world. But I don't know, like I didn't really have an agenda going in other than just like, I really want to be myself. And I think that I hopefully did that. And yeah, I came across maybe more as like the crazy fun one, but that's who I am. So I think I got like a decent edit based off of like, going into reality TV, you never know what could happen.
Totally.
But I trusted our production. They're all amazing. And I feel like they accurately like portrayed everyone.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
You did such a phenomenal job, truly. And I think, I had varying levels of skepticism as well. But I feel like as an ex-Mormon, I'm not interacting with Mormons that closely, but I feel like I saw myself in you and the things that I would have wanted to say to Jen or remind Jen or the reactions I might have had. I saw myself in that.
Well, and I hope people see that like when me or Demi were talking to Jen about Zach, like that was coming from a place of like, we love our friend and you deserve better and we want to protect you. It wasn't like coming at her and like, I think some people saw it that way, but it was really that we want to make sure you're okay.
Yeah,
you know?
and that's not stuff you fuck around with. No. I think you did a really good job of being like, hey, and you're a bit older, right? You've experienced more things. I think it's a huge benefit to Jen that she has people in her life who have said, I've done some of this stuff before and this is how it panned out. And I would hope if I was 24 in that situation, I would have people willing to say that to me. Yeah. And I'm sure it's not easy to hear, but I do think that it's an important thing to be said. And I'm just so happy for you. I'm so happy. I know because I went to the premiere. Yeah. And it was interesting because I'd watched a few episodes and then watching that first episode with you all in the room.
Oh, that was so weird.
It felt so different because you realize, and obviously, you signed up for it.
Yes.
Everyone signed up for it. They consented to it, but you still feel the weight of this is real people. Yeah. This is real people's lives. And even though it's not all you're not seeing everything, it's a slice of real people's lives.
It is.
And it felt almost a little heavy, not really for you, but for like Taylor in that first episode.
Yes. Oh, she was like 3 seats down and like crying. And you just remember like she's human. And watching this with friends and family, it's hard.
It's really hard. Yeah. And feeling that way, I think was a good reminder. Again, obviously people are going to do what they're going to do anyway. I think it's especially for the people within our community, wherever on the scale they fall of Mormonism, just remembering that these are real people experiencing real things, I think is really important. And I think it's different because any other reality TV I've watched has been so far removed. Even Real Housewives, it's like, that's such a different...
It still feels unattainable.
Yes.
Like glamorous, like they get ready every day. We do not on our show,
And you women were you went to Classic Fun Center.
Yeah,
I'm like, that was my field trips growing up. Like it was so close to home. It was literally here, home. Yeah. And so I thought that was a really powerful thing. And I just can't wait to see what happens for you all. It feels like such an exciting time.
It is. It's so exciting. And like, we didn't expect it. Like we knew it would probably do okay. But like the fact that it was #1 in 24 hours was crazy.
Such a huge deal.
Yeah. I'm like, that many people have seen my vagina. Amazing.
The labiaplasty we didn't even talk about. Even things like that. Yeah. I think, that's a whole conversation we could talk more about. But I personally feel like removing taboos and stigmas is always a really helpful thing and opening up conversations, seeing you all talk about sex and vibrators and things like that. And let's get Layla orgasming. I feel like those are really fun conversations to see amongst women who come from a culture and a society that doesn't really want women to be talking about that kind of stuff.
And you should be comfortable with your girlfriends or your sisters or whoever it may be. And I think in Mormonism, the problem is that we can't talk about it, and it's so shut down that when you actually are able to be married and do that, it almost feels bad. Like that took a long time for me to be like, yesterday this was bad, but today I can do it. That's a hard thing.
I'm still undoing it in a lot of ways. And even to me, I mean, I feel bad that a part of her sex life was revealed that she didn't want and then made fun of. But even that, I think it's genuinely a powerful thing to understand that women are, I don't know, it's almost like I'm like, I'm inspired. I'm going to call and be like, okay, so teach
Pick up
me.
some Fruity Pebbles on the way home.
But I think it does help you work through your own sexual shame to understand that women are experimenting in these different ways or trying these different things.
Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking, I'm like, oh, I could go a lot crazier than I currently am.
No, totally.
I think that can be a really, really good thing. I think it is a good thing.
Especially in this culture.
Absolutely.
Because it is usually so hush-hush.
Absolutely.
That, girls can't ask questions to their mom or their friends,
Yes. Yes, about anything.
Exactly. I want my kids to grow up knowing, like,
same.
This is okay to talk about. And I always say to Jordan, like, we talk about it, like, I want my kids, like, obviously I'm never going to condone them doing this, but let's say they are drinking at a party, call me to come pick you up. Don't be stupid. Like, I just want them to have that relationship where, like, they know they can trust us.
Absolutely.
And we're going to still lay into them, but, like, help them.
I feel the same way. I definitely think, ironically, a lot of my Mormon upbringing, I would hope for my kids, such as like, I don't want them drinking in high school.
Like the good morals and values.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if they do, I would much rather they feel safe to tell me and not feel unnecessary guilt and shame.
Yeah.
I would rather have it based on, hey, this is actually bad for your brain, as opposed to God, you have to go repent, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly.
So I think we actually, a lot of ex-Mormons still align on a lot of things.
Yeah.
It's just a very different
It's a different
reasoning.
standpoint.
Yes.
Like alcohol's poison.
Yes.
I don't want you doing that to your brain at a young age versus just like, we don't do it because Jesus said no.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You're the best. Thank you so much. Truly. I know this is, again, such a crazy time.
Yeah.
It is not lost on me that you took time to
Oh
come
my gosh,
here.
of course. I'm so excited because again, your podcast like helped me through the season. So like it's full circle for
Oh,
me.
I so appreciate that. Thank you so
Yes.
much, Jessie. And thank you everyone for listening. Bye.
GIRLSCAMP, it's Girls Camp.
This has been a 58 Ember production. For more shows, please visit the 58 Ember channel, 58ember.com, or find us at 58 Ember Media on socials.